In our modern world, we encounter them everywhere. The boss who takes credit for your work while never acknowledging your contributions. The romantic partner who showers you with attention one day, then treats you as invisible the next. The friend who dominates every conversation, turning your pain into their opportunity to showcase their own drama. The parent who treats their child as an extension of themselves rather than a separate human being. These individuals share a common thread that weaves through their behavior like poison through water. They live in a world where only their needs matter, where other people exist primarily as sources of admiration or obstacles to their desires. On the surface, they may appear confident, successful, even magnetic. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lies something far more complex and disturbing. We are entering the psychological landscape of narcissism, a realm where grandiosity masks profound vulnerability, where the desperate need for validation drives destructive behavior, and where the inability to truly connect with others creates a wake of emotional devastation. This is not simply about vanity or self-love. True narcissism represents a fundamental distortion in how a person relates to themselves and others. It is a psychological prison where the inmate and the guard are the same person, where freedom can only come through facing truths that the entire personality structure was built to avoid. Understanding this phenomenon is not merely an academic exercise. It is essential knowledge for anyone who wants to protect themselves, help their loved ones, or simply navigate a world where narcissistic patterns are becoming increasingly common. Part 1. The Architecture of the False Self. To understand the narcissistic mind, we must first grasp the fundamental tragedy at its core. Imagine a house built on quicksand, with magnificent facades and impressive rooms, but with no solid foundation to support its weight. This is the psychological structure of narcissism, a personality built not on authentic self-knowledge and genuine self-worth, but on an elaborate system of defenses designed to protect against unbearable feelings of inadequacy and shame. The narcissistic individual lives in constant terror of being exposed as ordinary, flawed, or vulnerable. To defend against this terror, they construct what psychologists call a false self, a grandiose persona that demands constant validation from the outside world. This false self is not simply confidence or healthy self-esteem taken too far. It represents a complete disconnection from authentic inner experience, a psychological sleight of hand where the person convinces themselves and others that they are fundamentally superior to everyone around them. But here lies the cruel paradox that defines narcissistic existence. The more energy they invest in maintaining this false self, the more disconnected they become from any genuine sense of worth. They become addicted to external validation, like a drug user becomes addicted to their substance of choice. Each compliment, each moment of admiration, each sign of envy from others provides a temporary fix, but the underlying emptiness remains. And like any addiction, the doses required become larger and more frequent over time, driving increasingly desperate and destructive behavior. This creates what researchers call the narcissistic cycle. The individual seeks admiration and validation from others through various strategies such as boasting, manipulation, or achievement. When they receive this validation, they experience a temporary high, feeling confirmed in their superiority. But this feeling never lasts because it is built on external sources rather than internal self-worth. When the validation stops coming, or when they encounter criticism or indifference, They experience what feels like a catastrophic threat to their very existence. This triggers narcissistic injury, leading to rage, depression, or frantic efforts to restore their inflated self-image. The signs of this false self-structure are often visible to those who know what to look for. Watch for individuals who seem incapable of genuine self-reflection or admitting to even minor mistakes. Notice those who consistently steer conversations back to themselves, who seem to view other people's experiences primarily in terms of how they relate to their own life. Observe people who react to criticism with disproportionate anger, or who interpret neutral comments as personal attacks. These behaviors signal a personality structure built on sand rather than solid psychological ground. Perhaps most telling is their relationship with authentic emotion. Narcissistic individuals often seem to experience feelings in a shallow or performative way. Their sadness seems designed to evoke sympathy rather than expressing genuine grief. Their anger appears calculated to intimidate or punish rather than arising from legitimate frustration. Their joy often centers on their own achievements or the misfortune of others rather than on genuine connection or beauty. Even their love feels conditional, based on what others can do for them, rather than on appreciation for who those people truly are. This emotional shallowness creates profound loneliness, though narcissistic individuals rarely acknowledge this directly. They are surrounded by people who know only their false self, meaning they never experience the relief and connection that comes from being truly seen and accepted. They cannot receive genuine love because they have never shown their genuine self. They cannot give genuine love because they are not in contact with their own authentic feelings. This isolation feeds the very wounds that created the narcissistic defense in the first place, perpetuating a cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break as years pass. For those attempting to recognize these patterns in others, pay attention to how the person responds when they are not the center of attention. Does their mood shift dramatically when the focus moves away from them? Do they seem genuinely interested in your experiences, or do they quickly redirect conversations back to their own concerns? Notice whether their concern for others seems genuine or whether it appears motivated by their own image management. These subtle signs often reveal the difference between healthy confidence and pathological narcissism more clearly than dramatic displays of grandiosity. The tragedy of the false self is that it represents both the problem and the solution from the narcissistic person's perspective. It protects them from confronting unbearable feelings of worthlessness while simultaneously ensuring that these feelings remain unhealed. It provides temporary relief from psychological pain while creating the very conditions that generate more pain. Understanding this paradox is crucial for anyone dealing with narcissistic individuals, whether in personal relationships, professional settings, or family dynamics. The false self is not simply a choice or a character flaw, but a psychological survival mechanism that has outlived its usefulness and become a prison. Part 2. The two faces of narcissistic expression. Narcissism does not present itself in a single, uniform way. Instead, it manifests through two distinct but related patterns that can exist within the same individual, sometimes shifting like weather patterns throughout their life. Understanding these two faces is crucial because they require different strategies for recognition and protection. The first face is what researchers call grandiose narcissism, the stereotypical image most people have when they think of a narcissist. The grandiose narcissist is the person who walks into a room expecting all eyes to turn toward them. They speak with absolute confidence about topics they may know little about, interrupt others without apology, and seem genuinely surprised when anyone questions their authority or expertise. These individuals are often charming in initial encounters because their confidence can be magnetic and their self-assurance compelling. They tell captivating stories where they are always the hero, always the most clever person in the room, always the one who saved the day or delivered the perfect comeback. Watch for specific behavioral patterns that reveal grandiose narcissism in action. Notice individuals who consistently dominate conversations, who seem incapable of asking genuine questions about others, and who treat service workers or subordinates with obvious disdain. Observe those who name-drop constantly, who exaggerate their achievements or connections, and who become visibly agitated when forced to wait in line or follow rules that apply to everyone else. Pay attention to people who seem to view every interaction as a competition they must win, who cannot celebrate others' successes without making the conversation about themselves, and who appear genuinely confused when their obviously superior ideas are not immediately adopted by everyone around them. But there exists a second, more hidden face of narcissism that is often overlooked and frequently more dangerous. Vulnerable narcissism presents as the wounded, misunderstood individual who believes they possess special qualities that the world has failed to recognize. These individuals appear humble, even self-deprecating, but beneath this modest exterior lies the same core belief in their own specialness that drives their grandiose counterparts. They are the martyrs, the unrecognized geniuses, the sensitive souls too pure for this harsh world. The vulnerable narcissist operates through what appears to be weakness, but is actually a sophisticated form of manipulation. They use their pain as a weapon, their sensitivity as a shield, and their perceived victimhood as a way to control others. They are experts at making others feel guilty for not recognizing their worth, for not providing enough support, or for failing to understand their unique struggles. Unlike grandiose narcissists who demand attention through dramatic displays of superiority, vulnerable narcissists extract attention through elaborate demonstrations of suffering. The signs of vulnerable narcissism are subtle but distinct once you know what to look for. Watch for individuals who consistently position themselves as victims in every conflict, who seem to collect grievances like trophies, and who respond to criticism with hurt withdrawal rather than anger. Notice those who speak frequently about how others have disappointed them, who seem to require constant reassurance but are never satisfied with the amount they receive, and who subtly compete over who has suffered more or struggled harder. Pay attention to people who use their mental health struggles, their difficult childhood, or their current hardships as reasons why normal rules or expectations should not apply to them. Both types share fundamental characteristics that unite them under the narcissistic umbrella. They both possess an inflated sense of their own importance, though it manifests differently in each type. They both struggle with genuine empathy, though grandiose types appear openly callous, while vulnerable types seem oversensitive only to their own pain. They both manipulate others to maintain their self-image, though grandiose types use intimidation and charm, while vulnerable types use guilt and pity. Most importantly, they both view other people primarily in terms of what those people can provide for them, rather than as separate individuals worthy of respect and consideration. The most challenging aspect of dealing with narcissistic individuals is that many people can shift between these two presentations depending on what the situation requires. The same person who presents as a confident leader in professional settings may become a wounded victim when confronted about their behavior at home. The individual who plays the martyr in their family relationships may transform into an arrogant bully when given power over others. This shape-shifting quality makes narcissistic people particularly difficult to pin down and understand, leaving their targets confused and doubting their own perceptions. To protect yourself from both types, develop what psychologists call emotional boundaries. With grandiose narcissists, this means refusing to be impressed by their self-promotion, not engaging in their competitive games, and maintaining your own sense of reality when they attempt to gaslight you. With vulnerable narcissists, protection involves resisting their attempts to make you feel responsible for their emotional state, not accepting guilt for their disappointments, and recognizing that their pain does not give them the right to mistreat others. In both cases, the key is maintaining your own center and not allowing their distorted worldview to become your reality. Part 3. The Genesis of Grandiosity. To understand how narcissism develops, we must journey into the crucial early years when a child's sense of self is first forming. This is not a story of simple cause and effect, but rather a complex interplay of factors that can transform a naturally self-centered infant into an adult trapped in patterns of pathological self-absorption. The research reveals that narcissism is not born but made, crafted through specific types of childhood experiences that teach a developing mind dangerous lessons about worth, love, and human connection. The most significant factor in creating narcissistic patterns is what researchers call parental overvaluation. Picture parents who consistently tell their child that they are more special, more talented, more deserving than other children. These are not parents who simply love their child or believe in their potential, but rather caregivers who actively foster a sense of superiority and entitlement. They may excuse their child's poor behavior toward others, insist that rules should not apply to their special offspring, or consistently blame teachers, coaches, or other children when their child faces any form of criticism or consequence. This overvaluation creates a fundamental distortion in the child's developing sense of self. Instead of learning that they are valuable simply for being human, they absorb the message that their worth depends on being superior to others. They come to believe that love and attention are things they deserve by virtue of their specialness, rather than gifts that flow naturally from healthy relationships. This sets up a lifelong pattern where they expect preferential treatment and become genuinely confused and angry when the world fails to recognize their obvious superiority. But overvaluation is only one path towards narcissistic development. At the opposite extreme, some narcissistic individuals emerge from childhoods marked by emotional neglect, criticism, or abuse. In these cases, the grandiose self develops as a protective shield against unbearable feelings of worthlessness and vulnerability. The child learns that their authentic self is unacceptable or dangerous, so they create an idealized version that they hope will finally earn the love and protection they desperately need. Perhaps most damaging is the pattern where children are used as extensions of their parents' own narcissistic needs. These are the parents who live vicariously through their child's achievements, who punish their child for any failure that reflects poorly on them, or who treat their child as a confidant for adult problems and emotions. The child learns that their role is not to develop their own authentic self, but to serve their parents' emotional needs, and reflect glory back onto the family system. They become skilled at reading others' needs and desires, not out of empathy, but out of survival necessity. The signs that a child may be developing narcissistic patterns are often visible to trained observers. Watch for children who cannot tolerate losing games or competitions, who consistently blame others for their mistakes, and who seem genuinely surprised when they face consequences for harmful behavior. Notice kids who show little genuine empathy for others' pain, who seem to view friendships primarily in terms of what they can get from other children, and who become disproportionately upset when they are not the center of attention. Pay attention to children who lie easily and convincingly, who manipulate adults against each other, and who seem to lack age-appropriate guilt or remorse when they hurt others. The family dynamics that foster narcissism often involve what psychologists call enmeshment, where boundaries between family members become blurred. In these families, the child's achievements become the parent's achievements, the child's failures become catastrophic family crises, and the child's emotions are either dismissed or treated as more important than anyone else's feelings. The child never learns where they end and others begin, never develops a solid sense of their own identity separate from their role in maintaining family stability or parental self-esteem. They grow up believing that other people exist primarily to serve their needs, just as they were taught to serve their parents' needs. Critical to understanding narcissistic development is recognizing the difference between healthy self-esteem and narcissistic grandiosity. Healthy self-esteem develops when children receive unconditional love alongside appropriate limits and expectations. These children learn that they are valuable as human beings, while also learning that they must consider others' needs and follow reasonable rules. They develop what psychologists call secure attachment, knowing that they are loved not for what they achieve or how they make others feel, but simply for who they are. Narcissistic grandiosity, by contrast, develops when children receive conditional love based on performance, achievement, or their ability to enhance their parents' self-image. These children learn that love is something to be earned rather than freely given, that their worth depends on being superior to others, and that vulnerability or ordinary human needs are dangerous signs of weakness. They develop what researchers call insecure attachment patterns, never quite trusting that others will be there for them, and constantly working to earn love and attention through manipulation or performance. This creates adults who appear supremely confident but are actually desperate for validation they can never quite receive. For parents seeking to prevent narcissistic development in their children, the research provides clear guidance. Show your children unconditional love while maintaining consistent boundaries and expectations. Praise effort and character, rather than achievements or natural talents. Teach empathy by modeling it yourself and helping children understand how their behavior affects others. Avoid using your children to meet your own emotional needs and resist the temptation to live vicariously through their successes or failures. Most importantly, help them develop a realistic sense of their own strengths and weaknesses, teaching them that being human means being both wonderfully unique and fundamentally similar to everyone else. Part 4. The Empathy Paradox. One of the most misunderstood aspects of narcissism involves the complex relationship these individuals have with empathy. The common belief that narcissists completely lack empathy is both true and false, depending on how we define and measure this crucial human capacity. Understanding this paradox is essential for anyone attempting to navigate relationships with narcissistic individuals, because their empathic abilities are not absent but rather compromised, selective and often weaponized. Modern neuroscience reveals that empathy operates through multiple brain systems that can function independently of each other. Cognitive empathy involves the ability to understand intellectually what another person is thinking or feeling, while affective empathy involves actually experiencing emotional resonance with others' feelings. Narcissistic individuals often possess intact or even heightened cognitive empathy, meaning they can read others' emotions with remarkable accuracy. This is what makes them such effective manipulators, able to identify precisely what buttons to push to get the reactions they desire. The deficit lies primarily in affective empathy, the emotional component that would normally make someone care about the pain they observe in others. Narcissistic individuals can see your hurt, understand your vulnerability, and recognize your emotional needs with laser-like precision. But instead of feeling moved to comfort or help, they often view this information as useful data for future manipulation or as confirmation of their own superiority. They possess the tools of empathy without the emotional motivation that would normally drive pro-social behavior. This creates what researchers call strategic empathy, where empathic responses are deployed only when they serve the narcissistic individual's own interests. Watch for people who seem remarkably attuned to others' emotions when they want something, but appear completely oblivious to others' pain when providing comfort would require genuine sacrifice. Notice individuals who can deliver exactly the right words of support when they need to maintain someone's loyalty, but become suddenly tone-deaf when asked to provide emotional support that offers them no benefit. Pay attention to those who seem to understand exactly how to hurt you most effectively during conflicts, demonstrating that they do indeed recognize your vulnerabilities even if they claim not to understand why you are upset. The empathy paradox becomes even more complex when we consider how narcissistic individuals experience their own emotions. Many struggle with what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to identify and distinguish between different emotional states. They may experience a general sense of distress when things do not go their way, but lack the emotional vocabulary or self-awareness to understand whether they are feeling hurt, angry, disappointed, or afraid. This emotional confusion makes it even harder for them to recognize and respond appropriately to similar emotions in others. Their relationship with their own vulnerability creates another layer of the empathy paradox. Narcissistic individuals often cannot tolerate awareness of their own pain, weakness, or need for others because these feelings threaten their carefully constructed self-image. This means they must also deny or minimize these same qualities in others, because witnessing vulnerability in other people reminds them of the vulnerability they desperately try to hide in themselves. They may respond to others' pain with irritation, contempt, or advice to get over it, not because they cannot see the pain, but because acknowledging it would force them to confront their own carefully buried wounds. The signs of compromised empathy in narcissistic individuals often appear in subtle ways that can be easy to miss initially. Watch for people who seem to offer support only when others are watching, who provide comfort in ways that somehow make the situation about them, or who become impatient with others' emotional needs that extend beyond a brief conversation. Notice individuals who seem unable to sit quietly with someone else's pain without offering solutions, changing the subject, or sharing a story about their own similar experience. Pay attention to those who remember facts about your life, but seem to forget how you felt about important events, or who can recall your achievements but not your struggles. Perhaps most telling is how they respond when their own behavior causes pain to others. Individuals with healthy empathy feel genuine remorse when they hurt someone, experience emotional discomfort that motivates them to make amends, and show changed behavior to prevent similar harm in the future. Narcissistic individuals, by contrast, often respond to others' pain with defensiveness, blame-shifting or irritation that the other person is making such a big deal out of nothing. They may offer superficial apologies that focus more on getting the other person to stop being upset than on acknowledging the harm they caused. They rarely show sustained behavior change because they do not experience the emotional discomfort that would normally motivate such change. This empathy paradox has profound implications for relationships with narcissistic individuals. It means that appeals to their compassion or attempts to help them understand how their behavior affects others are likely to be ineffective. They often do understand the impact of their behavior quite well, but simply do not care enough to change it. This realization can be devastating for family members, romantic partners, or friends who assume that if they could just explain how much they are hurting, the narcissistic person would surely modify their behavior. Instead of trying to evoke empathy that may not be accessible, focus on protecting yourself through clear boundaries and natural consequences. Narcissistic individuals are often more responsive to limits that affect their own comfort or image than to emotional appeals about others' feelings. They may not care that their behavior hurts you, but they may modify it if continuing means losing access to something they value or facing social consequences they find unacceptable. Understanding this difficult truth can help you develop more effective strategies for dealing with narcissistic individuals while protecting your own emotional well-being. Part 5. The Manipulation Arsenal. Narcissistic individuals possess a sophisticated toolkit of manipulation tactics that they deploy with remarkable consistency across different relationships and situations. These strategies are not necessarily conscious or premeditated, but rather automatic responses designed to maintain their inflated self-image and ensure a steady supply of attention and validation. Understanding these tactics is crucial for anyone seeking to protect themselves from psychological manipulation and maintain their own sense of reality in relationships with narcissistic individuals. One of the most powerful weapons in the narcissistic arsenal is something called gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation designed to make the target doubt their own perceptions, memories, and sanity. The term comes from a 1944 film where a husband systematically manipulates his wife into believing she is losing her mind. In relationships with narcissistic individuals, gaslighting often begins subtly and escalates over time. They may deny saying things you clearly remember them saying, insist that events happen differently than you recall, or claim that your emotional reactions are evidence of your instability rather than reasonable responses to their behavior. Watch for phrases that signal gaslighting attempts in action. Listen for statements like, "That never happened," "You are being too sensitive," "You are imagining things," or "I never said that." Notice when someone consistently reframes your legitimate concerns as character flaws on your part, when they accuse you of being crazy or unstable whenever you question their behavior, or when they use your past mistakes or vulnerabilities as weapons to discredit your current perceptions. Pay attention to how you feel after conversations with certain individuals. If you frequently find yourself confused, doubting your own memory, or wondering if you are overreacting to obviously problematic behavior, you may be experiencing gaslighting. Another cornerstone of narcissistic manipulation is the technique known as triangulation. This involves bringing a third party into conflicts or relationships in ways that create drama, competition, or insecurity. Narcissistic individuals use triangulation to maintain power and control while avoiding direct confrontation or accountability. They may compare you unfavorably to other people, share private information about your relationship with others, or create situations where multiple people are competing for their attention or approval. Triangulation can take many forms that are important to recognize. In romantic relationships, it might involve mentioning how attractive or successful an ex-partner was, flirting with others in front of you, or sharing intimate details about your relationship with friends or family members. In family settings, it could mean playing siblings against each other, telling each child different versions of family rules or expectations, or using one family member's behavior to shame or manipulate another. In workplace situations, triangulation might involve comparing employees' performance in ways designed to create competition rather than collaboration, or sharing confidential information about one person with another to maintain control over office dynamics. The love bombing and devaluation cycle represents another sophisticated manipulation strategy that hooks victims into trauma-bonded relationships. Love bombing involves overwhelming someone with excessive attention, affection, and promises in the early stages of a relationship. The narcissistic individual presents themselves as the perfect partner, friend, or colleague, showering their target with praise, gifts, and declarations of special connection. This creates an addictive high that becomes the standard against which all future interactions are measured. Once the target is emotionally invested, the devaluation phase begins gradually and unpredictably. The same person who once called you amazing begins to criticize your appearance, your choices, or your character. They may withdraw affection without explanation, become suddenly cold or dismissive, or begin comparing you unfavorably to others. This dramatic shift is deeply confusing because it contradicts everything they said during the love-bombing phase, leaving the target desperately trying to regain the initial high by working harder to please the narcissistic person. Projection represents another key manipulation tactic where narcissistic individuals attribute their own negative qualities or behaviors to others. They may accuse you of being selfish while demonstrating extreme self-centeredness themselves, call you manipulative while actively trying to control your behavior, or claim you are lying while being dishonest about their own actions. This serves multiple functions. It deflects attention from their own problematic behavior, it makes you question your own character, and it allows them to maintain their self-image as the wronged party in any conflict. Projection can be particularly confusing because narcissistic individuals often deliver these accusations with such conviction that observers may believe they are telling the truth. The silent treatment or emotional withdrawal serves as another powerful manipulation tool. When narcissistic individuals do not get their way or face criticism, they cannot deflect. They may simply disappear emotionally or physically from the relationship. This punishment is designed to train others to avoid behaviors that displease them and to demonstrate their power to control the emotional climate of relationships. The silent treatment can last for hours, days, or even weeks, leaving the target anxious and willing to do almost anything to restore connection and peace. To protect yourself from these manipulation tactics, develop what psychologists call a reality anchor. Keep a journal of important conversations and events so you can refer back to facts when someone tries to gaslight you. Maintain relationships with trusted friends or family members who can provide perspective when you begin to doubt your own perceptions. Learn to recognize the emotional and physical sensations that accompany manipulation attempts, such as feeling confused, anxious, or guilty after conversations that should have been straightforward. Most importantly, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you cannot immediately articulate what the problem is. Your emotional responses are valuable data that can alert you to manipulation attempts before they fully take hold. Part 6. The Relationship Minefield. Intimate relationships with narcissistic individuals follow predictable patterns that can trap even the most intelligent and self-aware people in cycles of hope and disappointment. These relationships are characterized by intense highs and devastating lows, moments of seeming connection followed by bewildering emotional distance, and a constant sense that you are walking on eggshells to avoid triggering unpredictable reactions. Understanding these patterns can help both current victims and those considering relationships with potentially narcissistic individuals make informed decisions about their emotional safety and well-being. The initial phase of a relationship with a narcissistic person often feels magical and unprecedented. They seem to understand you in ways no one else ever has. They make you feel special and chosen, and they create an intense sense of connection that can feel like destiny or soulmate recognition. This is not accidental, but rather the result of sophisticated emotional manipulation techniques that narcissistic individuals have perfected through years of practice. They excel at reading people quickly and reflecting back exactly what each person most wants to see, creating a mirroring effect that feels deeply validating and addictive. During this honeymoon phase, the narcissistic partner typically displays what appears to be remarkable empathy and understanding. They remember every detail you share about your past, your dreams, your fears, and your desires. They seem genuinely interested in your life and experiences in ways that may be completely new for you. What victims do not realize is that this information is being collected and stored not out of genuine care, but as ammunition for future manipulation and control. The very vulnerabilities you share in trust will later be used against you during conflicts, or when the narcissistic person needs to regain power in the relationship. As the relationship progresses, subtle changes begin to occur that can be easy to dismiss or rationalize. The person who once hung on your every word begins to interrupt you or seem distracted when you speak. They may start making small criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions, pointing out flaws in your appearance, your choices, or your behavior that they claim to want to help you improve. They begin to test boundaries, seeing how much they can get away with before you push back, and they start introducing elements of competition or comparison into the relationship. One of the most damaging patterns in narcissistic relationships is the intermittent reinforcement schedule that develops over time. Just as slot machines are designed to pay out unpredictably to keep gamblers hooked, narcissistic individuals learn to provide just enough positive attention and affection to keep their partners emotionally invested. They may be cruel or dismissive for days or weeks, then suddenly return to the charming, attentive behavior that characterized the early relationship. This creates a trauma bond where the victim becomes addicted to the rare moments of positive attention, constantly working to recreate the conditions that might bring back the loving partner they fell in love with. The double bind situations that narcissistic individuals create represent another particularly cruel aspect of these relationships. They may criticize you for being too dependent, then become angry when you show independence. They might complain that you never trust them, then lie or hide information in ways that justify your suspicion. They may claim they want honesty from you, then punish you severely when you share difficult truths about your feelings or their behavior. These double binds are designed to ensure that you can never quite get the relationship right, keeping you constantly off balance and focused on trying to please someone whose rules change without notice. Sexual intimacy in relationships with narcissistic individuals often becomes another arena for control and manipulation. They may use sex as a reward for good behavior or withdraw it as punishment for perceived slights. They often show little interest in their partner's genuine pleasure or satisfaction, viewing sexual encounters primarily as opportunities to confirm their own desirability and prowess. They may pressure partners into acts that feel uncomfortable or degrading, then use guilt, manipulation, or threats to overcome resistance. The emotional intimacy that should accompany physical intimacy is typically absent, leaving partners feeling used rather than connected, even during supposedly loving moments. Financial control represents another common feature of narcissistic relationships. The narcissistic partner may insist on controlling all financial decisions, preventing their partner from having independent access to money or resources. They might run up debts in both names while hiding the extent of financial problems, or they may use money as a weapon, threatening to cut off support whenever their partner displeases them. Even in relationships where both people work, the narcissistic individual often finds ways to maintain financial power, whether through controlling bank accounts, hiding assets, or sabotaging their partner's career advancement. The isolation that occurs in narcissistic relationships often happens so gradually that victims do not notice until it is complete. The narcissistic partner may express dislike for your friends and family, creating conflict whenever you spend time with other people. They might schedule competing activities during times when you have plans with others, create emergencies that require your immediate attention, or simply make spending time with others so unpleasant that you eventually stop trying. They may monitor your communications, demand explanations for every social interaction, or become jealous and suspicious of any relationship that might threaten their control over your attention and loyalty. For those currently in relationships with potentially narcissistic individuals, safety planning becomes essential. Maintain connections with trusted friends and family members, even if it creates conflict in your relationship. Keep some money and important documents accessible in case you need to leave quickly. Document incidents of abuse or manipulation, so you have a record of patterns that may be hard to remember clearly during gaslighting attempts. Most importantly, trust your instincts about your own safety and well-being, even when others minimize your concerns or when the narcissistic partner alternates abuse with apologies and promises to change. Remember that healthy relationships involve mutual respect, genuine care for each other's well-being, and the freedom to maintain your own identity and connections outside the relationship. Part 7. The Corporate Narcissist. The workplace provides fertile ground for narcissistic behavior to flourish, offering hierarchies to climb, competitors to defeat, and audiences to impress. Corporate narcissists often rise to positions of power because their confidence and self-promotion can be mistaken for leadership qualities, while their willingness to take credit and shift blame can help them navigate office politics effectively. However, their presence in professional environments creates toxic dynamics that can devastate team morale, sabotage productivity, and drive talented employees to seek opportunities elsewhere. The narcissistic boss represents one of the most challenging workplace dynamics because of the inherent power imbalance that prevents direct confrontation or easy escape. These leaders often micromanage their employees while taking credit for any successes that occur under their supervision. They may set constantly changing expectations that make it impossible for subordinates to succeed, then use these inevitable failures as evidence of employee incompetence rather than management problems. They typically show favoritism toward employees who feed their ego while punishing those who demonstrate independent thinking or fail to provide sufficient admiration. Watch for specific warning signs that indicate you may be dealing with a narcissistic supervisor. Notice bosses who seem incapable of admitting mistakes or learning from feedback, who consistently blame external factors or subordinates when projects fail, and who take personal credit for team achievements while distancing themselves from team failures. Pay attention to leaders who seem more interested in managing their image than in actual results, who spend excessive time self-promoting to higher-ups while neglecting their team's development needs. Be wary of supervisors who create competition between team members rather than fostering collaboration, who share confidential information inappropriately, or who seem to enjoy watching employees struggle without offering meaningful support. The narcissistic colleague presents different challenges, but can be equally disruptive to workplace harmony and productivity. These individuals often position themselves as the unofficial leader of any group project, regardless of their actual role or expertise. They may volunteer for high-visibility assignments, while avoiding routine work that does not offer opportunities for recognition. They typically dominate meetings with their own ideas while showing little interest in others' contributions, and they often form alliances with powerful people while treating those they perceive as less influential with obvious disdain. Narcissistic colleagues excel at taking credit for others' work through subtle but effective strategies. They may volunteer to present group projects to management, then emphasize their own contributions while minimizing others' roles. They might build on ideas proposed by teammates in meetings, then later reference these concepts as their own original thinking. They often position themselves as the point of contact for important communications, allowing them to control information flow and ensure their visibility in key relationships. When confronted about these behaviors, they typically respond with surprise and claim they were simply being helpful or taking initiative that others failed to show. The impact of workplace narcissism extends far beyond individual relationships to affect entire organizational cultures. Teams led by narcissistic individuals often develop cultures of fear, where employees are reluctant to share ideas, take risks, or acknowledge mistakes. Innovation suffers because narcissistic leaders typically resist suggestions that they did not originate and may punish employees whose ideas overshadow their own. Employee turnover tends to be high in departments with narcissistic leadership, as talented individuals seek environments where their contributions will be recognized and their professional growth supported. Customer relationships can also suffer when narcissistic employees prioritize their own needs over client satisfaction. Narcissistic salespeople may overpromise to close deals without considering whether their company can deliver, leaving others to manage disappointed customers. Narcissistic customer service representatives might escalate conflicts unnecessarily rather than admit they made mistakes, or they may provide inconsistent information to maintain their image as the expert rather than seeking help when needed. In client-facing roles, their need for admiration can override their commitment to honest, ethical business practices. Protecting yourself in workplace environments with narcissistic individuals requires careful strategy and documentation. Keep detailed records of your contributions to projects, including emails, drafts, and meeting notes that establish timelines and authorship of ideas. Copy key stakeholders on important communications so that narcissistic colleagues cannot later claim credit for your work or distort your messages. Build relationships with colleagues and supervisors outside your immediate team so that you have allies who can verify your contributions and support your professional development. When possible, request written confirmation of assignments, expectations, and deadlines to protect yourself from gaslighting attempts. If you must work closely with a narcissistic individual, focus on managing the relationship rather than trying to change their behavior. Provide the recognition and acknowledgement they crave when it costs you nothing and serves your professional goals. Avoid direct confrontation about their problematic behaviors unless absolutely necessary, as this typically results in retaliation rather than positive change. Instead, find ways to protect your own interests while allowing them to maintain their self-image. Frame your ideas and suggestions in ways that allow them to feel ownership or credit if this helps you achieve important business objectives without compromising your integrity. When narcissistic behavior becomes truly destructive to business operations, document specific incidents and their impact on measurable outcomes like productivity, customer satisfaction, or employee retention. Present these concerns to higher management in terms of business problems rather than personality conflicts. Focus on solutions and consequences, rather than attempting to diagnose or analyze the individual's psychological motivations. Remember that organizations often tolerate narcissistic behavior from high performers, so be prepared for the possibility that your concerns may not result in immediate changes. In some cases, the healthiest option may be to seek opportunities in organizations with stronger accountability measures and healthier leadership cultures. Part 8. When the mask slips. Perhaps no aspect of narcissistic behavior is more frightening or revealing than narcissistic rage. The explosive anger that erupts when their carefully constructed self-image faces genuine threat or challenge. This is not ordinary anger that arises from frustration or disappointment, but rather a primal, overwhelming fury that seems disproportionate to whatever triggered it. Understanding narcissistic rage is crucial for safety planning because these episodes can escalate quickly and unpredictably, sometimes resulting in verbal, emotional, or even physical violence. Narcissistic rage typically occurs when the individual experiences what psychologists call narcissistic injury, a blow to their inflated self-concept that cannot be easily deflected or denied. This might happen when someone publicly contradicts them, when they fail at something important, when they lose a competition or opportunity they expected to win, or when someone they consider inferior refuses to show proper respect or admiration. The rage response serves multiple functions. It punishes the person who caused the injury. It reasserts their power and dominance, and it serves as a warning to others about the consequences of challenging them. Most importantly, it provides an outlet for the unbearable shame and vulnerability that the narcissistic injury has triggered. The warning signs of impending narcissistic rage often appear subtle before the explosion occurs. Watch for sudden changes in facial expression, particularly a cold, hard look in their eyes that seems to strip away all warmth or humanity. Notice rapid shifts in tone of voice, from normal conversation to clipped, controlled speech that suggests barely contained fury. Pay attention to physical signs like clenched fists, rigid posture, or facial flushing that indicate rising anger. Be alert to verbal indicators like increasingly personal attacks, threats, or statements that reveal their underlying sense of entitlement and superiority. Sometimes the most dangerous moment comes during an eerie calm that precedes the storm, when they become suddenly quiet and calculating rather than obviously agitated. The content of narcissistic rage often reveals the deep wounds and fears that drive their defensive behavior. They may make statements like, "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" or "No one treats me this way," revealing their belief that they deserve special treatment and exemption from normal social rules. They might threaten consequences that seem wildly disproportionate to the perceived offence, such as ending relationships, destroying careers, or involving authorities in minor disputes. Their language often becomes grandiose and dramatic, with references to being betrayed, disrespected, or victimized in ways that reveal their profound sense of entitlement. They may make threats or promises they have no ability to carry out, driven more by their need to regain psychological control than by realistic assessment of their actual power. The aftermath of narcissistic rage episodes can be almost as damaging as the explosion itself. Many narcissistic individuals have little memory of their behavior during these episodes, claiming they were provoked beyond reason or that their reaction was justified by the other person's behavior. They may minimize the impact of their words and actions, suggesting that others are being too sensitive or making too big a deal out of nothing. Alternatively, they might engage in love-bombing behavior, showering their victims with apologies, gifts, or promises to change that are designed to prevent consequences rather than reflect genuine remorse. The cycle of rage followed by reconciliation can become addictive for victims, who mistake the relief of restored peace for evidence that the relationship is improving. Particularly dangerous is the cold, calculated rage that some narcissistic individuals display instead of explosive outbursts. These individuals may become quietly vindictive, planning elaborate schemes to punish those who have injured them. They might spread rumors, sabotage professional opportunities, turn mutual friends against their target, or engage in legal harassment through frivolous lawsuits or false accusations. This type of rage can persist for months or years, with the narcissistic individual dedicating enormous energy to destroying someone who challenged their self-image. The calculating nature of this revenge makes it particularly difficult to defend against and can cause lasting damage to the victim's reputation, relationships, and mental health. Children who witness narcissistic rage in their parents often develop lasting trauma that affects their ability to regulate their own emotions and form healthy relationships. They may become hypervigilant to signs of anger in others, constantly scanning for threats and trying to prevent conflict through perfectionism or people-pleasing behavior. They often struggle with setting boundaries as adults, because they learned that asserting their own needs could trigger dangerous explosions. Some children develop their own rage problems, having learned that explosive anger is an acceptable way to handle frustration or get their needs met. Others become conflict avoidant to an extreme degree, sacrificing their own well-being rather than risk triggering someone else's anger. If you find yourself regularly experiencing or witnessing narcissistic rage, safety planning becomes essential. Identify exit strategies for different locations where these episodes typically occur, whether at home, work, or social settings. Keep important phone numbers easily accessible, including friends, family members, or professionals who can provide support during crisis situations. Consider documenting incidents through written records, photographs or recordings, if legal in your area, as evidence may be important for legal or professional interventions later. Trust your instincts about escalation. If you sense that a situation is becoming dangerous, prioritize your immediate safety over trying to reason with someone in the grip of narcissistic rage. Remember that during these episodes, the person is not accessible to logic, empathy, or negotiation, and any attempts to defend yourself or explain your position are likely to fuel their fury rather than calm the situation. Part 9. The professional victim. One of the most insidious and difficult to recognize aspects of narcissistic behavior is the victim complex, where individuals use their own pain, trauma, or disadvantages as weapons to manipulate others and avoid accountability for their actions. This presentation is particularly challenging because it co-opts our natural empathy and desire to help those who are suffering, making it difficult to recognize when genuine pain is being weaponized for manipulative purposes. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because victim-playing narcissists can cause enormous damage while maintaining the moral high ground and garnering sympathy from others. The narcissistic victim complex operates on the principle that being wronged or suffering grants special privileges and exemptions from normal social rules and expectations. These individuals collect grievances like trophies, maintaining detailed mental catalogues of every slight, disappointment or injustice they have experienced. They use these experiences as justification for their own problematic behavior, arguing that their pain gives them the right to treat others poorly, or that their trauma makes them incapable of meeting normal responsibilities. The victim narrative becomes central to their identity, providing both explanation for their failures and protection from criticism. Watch for specific patterns that distinguish narcissistic victim playing from genuine expressions of pain or requests for support. Notice individuals who seem to compete over who has suffered more, who dismiss others' problems as less significant than their own, or who use their pain as a conversation stopper that prevents further discussion of their behavior. Pay attention to people who claim victim status, but show little empathy for others' suffering, who seem energized rather than depleted when discussing their trauma, or who resist suggestions for healing or moving forward from their painful experiences. Be wary of those who use their victim status to justify harmful behavior toward others, claiming that their pain gives them the right to be cruel, dishonest, or irresponsible. The timing of victim revelations often provides important clues about manipulative intent. Narcissistic individuals frequently deploy their victim stories strategically, particularly when facing consequences for their actions or when others are receiving attention they believe should be theirs. They might suddenly remember traumatic experiences when asked to take responsibility for mistakes, or they may share deeply personal struggles when someone else is celebrating achievements or receiving support. The victim narrative often emerges during conflicts as a way to shift focus from their problematic behavior to their own suffering, effectively putting their critics on the defensive and making continued confrontation seem cruel or insensitive. Particularly damaging is the way narcissistic victims manipulate others' natural helping instincts. They may present themselves as helpless or overwhelmed by their circumstances while simultaneously rejecting practical suggestions or assistance that might actually improve their situation. They often seek emotional support, but become angry or disappointed when that support comes with expectations for reciprocity or personal growth. They may drain helpers emotionally and financially, while maintaining that no amount of assistance is ever sufficient to address their enormous suffering. When helpers eventually become exhausted or start setting boundaries, the narcissistic victim adds these people to their list of those who have abandoned or betrayed them. The professional victim also uses their suffering as a shield against feedback or accountability. When confronted about harmful behavior, They immediately shift the conversation to their own pain, making it seem heartless to continue addressing the original issue. They may claim that criticism triggers their trauma, that their mental health cannot handle any form of confrontation, or that their past experiences make them fragile and in need of special consideration. This effectively creates a double standard, where they can hurt others with impunity while claiming that any negative response to their behavior constitutes further victimization. In family systems, the narcissistic victim often becomes the identified patient around whom all family energy revolves. Other family members learn to walk on eggshells to avoid triggering their pain, to sacrifice their own needs to accommodate their special requirements, and to accept behavior from them that would be unacceptable from anyone else. Children in these families often become parentified, learning to manage the victim's emotions and needs rather than focusing on their own development. The victim's pain becomes the family's organizing principle, with everyone's decisions filtered through consideration of how it might affect the suffering person. This dynamic can persist for decades, with adult children still organizing their lives around protecting their victim parent from any additional stress or disappointment. The distinction between narcissistic victim playing and legitimate trauma responses is crucial for both recognition and appropriate response. Genuine trauma survivors typically show evidence of working toward healing, demonstrate empathy for others despite their own pain, and do not use their experiences to justify harming others. They may struggle with symptoms and limitations related to their trauma, but they generally accept responsibility for their current behavior and choices. Narcissistic victims, by contrast, seem invested in maintaining their victim status, resist healing that might reduce their claim to special treatment, and use their pain as currency to purchase exemptions from normal social expectations. Protecting yourself from narcissistic victim manipulation requires developing what therapists call compassionate boundaries. You can acknowledge someone's pain without accepting responsibility for fixing it, or without allowing them to use that pain to control your behavior. Offer specific, limited forms of support rather than open-ended commitments to help with whatever they need. Maintain your own standards for acceptable behavior regardless of their trauma history, understanding that past pain does not give anyone the right to hurt others in the present. Most importantly, trust your instincts when something feels manipulative, even if you cannot immediately identify what is wrong with someone's request for help. Genuine victims rarely make others feel guilty for having boundaries or for being unable to provide unlimited support. Part 10. The Cultural Enabler. Modern society has created conditions that not only tolerate narcissistic behavior but often reward and celebrate it, leading to what some researchers describe as a narcissistic epidemic in Western cultures. Social media platforms, reality television, consumer culture, and individualistic values have combined to create an environment where narcissistic traits are often mistaken for confidence, ambition, and success. Understanding these cultural factors is essential for recognizing how society enables narcissism and for making conscious choices about the values we promote in our communities and families. Social media platforms represent perhaps the most significant cultural enabler of narcissistic behavior in human history. These platforms are specifically designed to provide the constant validation and attention that narcissistic individuals crave, with likes, comments, shares, and followers serving as quantifiable measures of social worth. The platforms reward self-promotion, attention-seeking behavior, and the creation of carefully curated false selves that bear little resemblance to reality. Users learn to present idealized versions of their lives, to compete for attention through increasingly dramatic content, and to measure their self-worth through metrics of online engagement. The intermittent reinforcement schedule of social media notifications creates addictive patterns that mirror the trauma bonding seen in relationships with narcissistic individuals. The rise of influencer culture has normalized the monetization of personality and lifestyle, teaching young people that their personal lives can and should be commodified for public consumption. Influencers often display classic narcissistic traits such as grandiosity, entitlement, and exploitation of relationships for content. Yet they are celebrated as entrepreneurs and role models. The message conveyed is that authentic relationships and experiences are less valuable than those that can be packaged and presented for audience consumption. This creates pressure to perform one's life rather than live it, leading to the development of false selves that prioritize image over substance. Celebrity culture and reality television have also contributed to the normalization of narcissistic behavior by presenting dysfunction as entertainment. Shows that feature people screaming at each other, manipulating relationships for drama, or displaying extreme self-centeredness are packaged as amusing rather than concerning. Celebrities who display obvious narcissistic traits are often described as confident or eccentric, rather than psychologically troubled. The message sent to viewers is that dramatic attention-seeking behavior is not only acceptable, but potentially profitable and admirable. Young people growing up in this environment may model these behaviors without understanding their psychological and social costs. Consumer culture feeds narcissistic tendencies by promoting the belief that personal worth can be demonstrated through material possessions and lifestyle choices. Marketing messages consistently tell us that we deserve the best, that we should never settle for less than perfection, and that our purchases reflect our superior taste and status. This creates a culture of entitlement where people believe they should have whatever they want, regardless of their ability to afford it or the impact on others. The emphasis on individual consumption over community well-being reinforces the narcissistic worldview that personal desires take precedence over collective responsibility. Educational systems often inadvertently enable narcissistic development through practices designed to boost self-esteem without requiring genuine achievement or character development. Programs that give every child a trophy regardless of performance, that avoid criticism in favor of constant praise, or that prioritize feeling good about oneself over developing competence and resilience, can create unrealistic expectations about how the world should respond to their presence. Students may graduate believing they are special and deserving of admiration without having developed the skills, work ethic, or character traits that would justify such treatment. When the real world fails to provide the constant validation they received in school, they may respond with narcissistic rage or withdrawal rather than self-reflection and growth. The corporate world often rewards narcissistic behavior through promotion practices that favor self-promotion over competence and collaboration. Employees who take credit for others' work, who network aggressively with powerful individuals, or who present themselves as indispensable, may advance faster than those who focus on actual job performance and team success. Leadership development programs sometimes emphasize confidence and charisma without equally emphasizing empathy, integrity, and servant leadership. This creates organizational cultures where narcissistic individuals thrive, while more ethical and collaborative employees become frustrated and seek opportunities elsewhere. Political systems in many countries have also become vehicles for narcissistic expression. with politicians who display grandiosity, lack of empathy and exploitation of others being rewarded with attention and power. The political process often favours those who can self-promote effectively over those who might govern more competently, but lack the narcissistic traits that draw media attention and voter excitement. Political discourse has become increasingly focused on personal attacks and image management rather than substantive policy discussions, modelling narcissistic behaviour patterns for the entire population. Citizens learn that winning is more important than truth, that loyalty to personalities matters more than principles, and that admitting mistakes or changing positions based on new information is a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. Counteracting these cultural enablers requires conscious effort to promote different values in our personal lives and communities. This means celebrating character traits like humility, empathy, and service to others, rather than just confidence and achievement. It involves teaching children that their worth comes from their inherent humanity, rather than their performance or accomplishments. It requires supporting businesses and leaders who demonstrate integrity and concern for stakeholder well-being rather than just profit maximization and self-promotion. Most importantly, it means modeling healthy behavior ourselves, showing others that it is possible to be confident without being arrogant, successful without being exploitative, and strong without being cruel. The cultural tide that enables narcissism can only be turned through millions of individual choices to prioritize substance over image and community well-being over personal aggrandizement. Part 11. The Narcissistic Parent. Perhaps nowhere is narcissistic behavior more damaging than in the parent-child relationship, where the developing mind of a child becomes the canvas for a narcissistic adult's psychological needs and dysfunction. Narcissistic parents view their children not as separate individuals worthy of love and guidance, but as extensions of themselves, whose purpose is to reflect glory back onto the family and provide emotional regulation for the parent. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for adult children seeking to heal from narcissistic parenting and for current parents who want to break generational cycles of dysfunction. The narcissistic parent operates from a fundamental inability to see their child as a separate person with their own needs, feelings, and developmental trajectory. Instead, the child exists to serve specific functions in the parent's psychological economy, to make them look good to others, to provide emotional support during difficult times, to fulfill dreams and ambitions the parent could not achieve, or to serve as a scapegoat for the family's problems. This creates what psychologists call parentification, where the child learns that their job is to take care of the parent's emotional needs, rather than focusing on their own growth and development. The parent-child relationship becomes inverted, with the child serving as the emotional adult while the parent remains psychologically adolescent. The golden child and scapegoat dynamic represents one of the most psychologically damaging patterns in narcissistic families. Narcissistic parents typically assign different roles to their children based on how well each child serves their emotional needs at any given time. The golden child is the one who currently reflects the most glory onto the parent, who shows the most promise for future achievement, or who provides the most reliable source of admiration and validation. This child receives preferential treatment, excessive praise, and is held up as the example for other family members to follow. However, the golden child status is conditional and can be revoked at any time if the child fails to meet the parent's needs or begins to show independence that threatens the parent's control. The scapegoat child bears the brunt of the family's dysfunction, being blamed for problems they did not cause, and punished for behaviors that are ignored or praised in the golden child. This child is often labeled as difficult, problematic, or the source of family stress, when in reality they may simply be responding normally to an abnormal situation. The scapegoat serves a crucial function in the narcissistic family system by providing a target for everyone's frustration and anger, allowing other family members to avoid dealing with the real source of dysfunction. These children often develop the healthiest psychological boundaries because they learn early that they cannot depend on their family for emotional support, but they also carry deep wounds from years of unfair treatment and blame. The invisible child in narcissistic families receives little attention or recognition, neither positive nor negative. These children learn to minimize their needs and avoid drawing attention to themselves because they observe what happens to siblings who do capture parental focus. They often become high achievers who still feel unnoticed and unimportant, or they may struggle with feelings of worthlessness because they never received the validation necessary for healthy self-esteem development. As adults, invisible children often have difficulty advocating for themselves, setting boundaries, or believing they deserve good treatment from others. Narcissistic parents excel at taking credit for their children's achievements while distancing themselves from their children's failures or struggles. When their child succeeds academically, athletically, or socially, the narcissistic parent presents themselves as the driving force behind that success, often exaggerating their own role in their child's accomplishments. They may brag about their superior parenting skills or genetic contributions while failing to acknowledge the child's own efforts and talents. Conversely, when children struggle with challenges like learning difficulties, mental health issues, or social problems, narcissistic parents often blame external factors, the child's other parent or the child themselves, rather than examining their own parenting practices. The emotional environment in narcissistic families is characterized by unpredictability and conditional love. Children never know which version of their parent they will encounter on any given day, creating a constant state of hypervigilance and anxiety. Love and approval are tied to performance and compliance, rather than being freely given based on the child's inherent worth. Children learn to read their parents' moods carefully and adjust their behavior accordingly, developing what becomes a lifelong pattern of people-pleasing and external validation-seeking. They may excel at anticipating others' needs while remaining disconnected from their own feelings and desires. Boundaries are virtually non-existent in narcissistic families, with parents routinely violating their children's privacy, autonomy, and emotional space. Narcissistic parents may read their children's diaries, monitor their communications, or share private information about their children with others without permission. They often involve children in adult problems and conflicts, using them as confidants for marital issues or financial stress. Children's bedrooms may not be private spaces. Their possessions may be subject to parental confiscation or disposal without notice, and their time may be controlled entirely by parental whims rather than their own developmental needs. The long-term effects of narcissistic parenting extend far into adulthood, affecting the grown child's ability to form healthy relationships, maintain appropriate boundaries, and develop a stable sense of self-worth. Adult children of narcissistic parents often struggle with people-pleasing behaviors, difficulty saying no to unreasonable requests, and a tendency to attract narcissistic partners who replicate familiar family dynamics. They may have trouble identifying their own needs and feelings, having learned that their role was to focus on others rather than developing self-awareness. Many struggle with imposter syndrome, feeling like frauds despite objective evidence of their competence and achievements. They often have difficulty trusting their own perceptions and may seek excessive validation from others before making decisions. For adult children seeking to heal from narcissistic parenting, the journey often begins with grieving the parents they needed but never had. This process involves accepting that their parent was not capable of providing healthy love and guidance, while also recognizing that this limitation was about the parent's psychological dysfunction rather than the child's worthiness. Healing requires learning to reparent themselves, developing the self-compassion and emotional support that was missing in childhood. Many benefit from therapy that helps them identify and change patterns learned in their family of origin while developing healthier relationship skills. Some find it necessary to limit contact with narcissistic parents or establish strict boundaries about acceptable behavior, prioritizing their own emotional well-being over family loyalty expectations. The goal is not to become perfect or to fix their parent, but to develop the emotional freedom to live authentically and form healthy connections with others. Part 12. The Aging Narcissist. As narcissistic individuals age, their psychological patterns often intensify and become more desperate, creating unique challenges for family members and caregivers who must navigate increasingly difficult behavior during a time when the person may require additional support and assistance. The natural losses that accompany aging, such as declining health, reduced social status, retirement from career roles, and the death of peers, pose direct threats to the narcissistic individual's sense of superiority and control. Understanding how narcissism evolves with age is crucial for families preparing for these challenges and for developing realistic expectations about care and relationship dynamics. The aging process presents particular psychological threats to narcissistic individuals because it forces confrontation with universal human limitations that their entire personality structure was designed to deny. Physical decline makes it harder to maintain the illusion of superiority, while cognitive changes may make it more difficult to manipulate others effectively. The loss of professional roles and social status that often comes with retirement can be devastating for those whose identity was built around external recognition and power. Younger generations may be less impressed by their achievements or less willing to tolerate their difficult behavior, leaving aging narcissists feeling increasingly isolated and irrelevant. Many aging narcissists respond to these challenges by becoming more controlling and demanding rather than developing acceptance or wisdom. They may become increasingly critical of family members, friends and caregivers, projecting their own fears and frustrations onto those around them. Medical appointments, living arrangements and financial decisions may become battlegrounds where they attempt to assert dominance and control. They often resist assistance while simultaneously complaining that others are not doing enough to help them, creating impossible situations for well-meaning family members who cannot win regardless of their efforts. The victim complex that characterizes some narcissistic individuals often becomes more pronounced with aging. They may use their health problems, loneliness, or financial concerns as weapons to manipulate others into providing attention and care. Every minor health issue becomes a major crisis requiring immediate family response, while others' health problems are minimized or ignored. They may threaten suicide or self-harm when they do not get their way, using their apparent vulnerability to control family dynamics and prevent others from setting healthy boundaries. The guilt and fear this creates in family members can lead to decades of emotional manipulation disguised as caring for an elderly relative. Financial manipulation often increases as narcissistic individuals age and may face genuine economic concerns. They may use promises of inheritance to control adult children's behavior, threatening to disinherit those who displease them or fail to provide sufficient attention. Some engage in financial abuse of other elderly individuals, using their charm and manipulation skills to exploit vulnerable peers. They may refuse to make realistic plans for their care, insisting that others will take care of them while providing no compensation or acknowledgement for the burden this places on their families. Money becomes another tool for maintaining power and control, even as their other sources of influence diminish. The healthcare system can become a new arena for narcissistic behavior, with aging narcissists treating medical professionals as personal servants who should cater to their every need and whim. They may demand special treatment, refuse to follow medical advice they dislike, or attempt to manipulate doctors into providing unnecessary procedures or medications. They often present themselves as more ill or disabled than they actually are to gain sympathy and special consideration. Conversely, they may minimize serious health problems that threaten their self-image, refusing treatment that could improve their quality of life but might force them to acknowledge their limitations. Family relationships often deteriorate further as narcissistic individuals age and become more dependent on others for practical and emotional support. Adult children who have maintained distant but civil relationships may find themselves drawn back into toxic dynamics when their parents' needs increase. The narcissistic parent may use guilt, manipulation and family loyalty expectations to pressure children into providing care regardless of the emotional cost. Siblings often find themselves in conflict over caregiving responsibilities, with the narcissistic parent playing them against each other or showing favoritism that creates resentment and division. The stress of caring for a narcissistic parent while trying to maintain one's own mental health and family relationships can lead to burnout, depression, and relationship problems for the adult children. Some aging narcissists become increasingly paranoid and suspicious, convinced that others are plotting against them or trying to take advantage of their perceived vulnerability. They may accuse family members of stealing from them, lying to them, or conspiring to harm them. These paranoid thoughts may be related to cognitive decline, but they often build on long-standing narcissistic patterns of viewing others as either devoted admirers or dangerous enemies. The paranoia can make it extremely difficult to provide care or assistance, as every helpful gesture is viewed with suspicion, and every caregiver becomes a potential threat. For family members dealing with aging narcissistic relatives, setting and maintaining boundaries becomes even more crucial, but also more challenging. The person's apparent vulnerability and genuine need for assistance can make it difficult to limit contact or refuse unreasonable demands. However, providing care without boundaries often leads to caregiver burnout and enables continued manipulative behavior. It may be necessary to arrange professional care rather than providing all assistance personally, both to ensure the person's needs are met and to protect family members from further psychological damage. Some families find that coordinating care through a professional case manager helps reduce manipulation and ensures that decisions are made based on actual needs rather than emotional manipulation. The reality is that most narcissistic individuals do not develop wisdom, acceptance, or improved relationships as they age. While some people use the challenges of aging as opportunities for growth and reconciliation, narcissistic individuals typically become more entrenched in their dysfunctional patterns. Family members who hope that time will heal old wounds or that the person will finally acknowledge the pain they have caused, are usually disappointed. The healthiest approach often involves accepting the person's limitations while protecting oneself from further harm, providing appropriate assistance without expecting gratitude or positive relationship changes. The goal becomes managing the situation with minimal damage rather than hoping for transformation that is unlikely to occur. Part 13. The Path to Recovery. For those who have survived relationships with narcissistic individuals, the journey towards psychological healing often feels overwhelming and uncertain. The damage inflicted by narcissistic abuse extends far beyond the obvious injuries, affecting the victim's sense of reality, self-worth, and ability to trust their own perceptions. Recovery requires not only healing from specific traumatic events, but also rebuilding fundamental aspects of identity and psychological functioning that may have been systematically eroded over months or years of manipulation and control. The first and often most difficult step in recovery involves accepting the reality of what has happened and acknowledging that the relationship was genuinely abusive rather than simply difficult or misunderstood. Victims of narcissistic abuse often struggle with this recognition because the abuse was psychological rather than physical, because it was intermittent rather than constant, and because they may have been convinced that they were the problem in the relationship. The gaslighting and reality distortion that characterize narcissistic relationships leave victims questioning their own memories and perceptions, making it hard to trust their assessment of what they experienced. Professional therapy, support groups, and educational resources about narcissistic abuse can help validate these experiences and provide the external confirmation needed to begin healing. Trauma bonding represents one of the most challenging aspects of recovery because it creates genuine biochemical addiction to the relationship despite its harmful nature. The intermittent reinforcement schedule of narcissistic relationships creates powerful emotional bonds that are difficult to break, even when the victim intellectually understands that the relationship is destructive. The brain becomes addicted to the neurochemical highs that occur during the brief periods of positive attention from the narcissistic person. Breaking this addiction requires understanding that the longing for the person is not evidence of true love, but rather a predictable psychological response to intermittent reinforcement. Recovery involves allowing oneself to grieve the loss of the relationship, while recognizing that what is being mourned is often an illusion rather than reality. Rebuilding trust in one's own perceptions and judgment is a crucial component of recovery that often takes considerable time and effort. Victims of narcissistic abuse have been systematically taught to doubt their own reality, to second-guess their emotional responses, and to defer to the narcissistic person's version of events. Learning to trust internal signals again requires practice and patience, often starting with small decisions and gradually building confidence in one's ability to assess situations accurately. Keeping a journal can help track thoughts, feelings, and experiences objectively, providing a reference point when self-doubt creeps in. Many survivors find it helpful to check their perceptions with trusted friends or therapists until their confidence in their own judgment is restored. The process of rediscovering authentic identity often feels like meeting oneself for the first time. Many survivors realize they have spent so much energy adapting to the narcissistic person's needs and expectations that they have lost touch with their own preferences, values, and goals. Recovery involves experimenting with different activities, relationships, and ways of being to discover what genuinely feels right rather than what others expect or approve of. This exploration can be both exciting and terrifying, as it requires taking risks and potentially making mistakes without the false security of someone else's approval. Many survivors describe feeling like teenagers again, learning basic life skills and relationship dynamics that they never had the opportunity to develop naturally. Developing healthy boundaries often requires learning skills that were never taught or that were systematically undermined in the narcissistic relationship. Survivors must learn to identify their own needs and limits, to communicate these boundaries clearly to others, and to enforce consequences when boundaries are violated. This process can feel selfish or mean to those who were trained to prioritize others' needs above their own, but healthy boundaries are essential for preventing future victimization. Boundary setting is a skill that improves with practice, starting with small situations and gradually building the confidence to maintain limits in more challenging circumstances. The hypervigilance that develops during narcissistic relationships can persist long after the relationship ends, creating exhaustion and making it difficult to relax and enjoy life. Survivors often find themselves constantly scanning for signs of danger, manipulation, or rejection in new relationships and situations. While some level of increased awareness can be protective, excessive hypervigilance interferes with the ability to form healthy connections and enjoy normal activities. Learning relaxation techniques, mindfulness practices, and trauma-informed therapy approaches can help calm the nervous system and reduce the constant state of alert that characterizes post-narcissistic stress. Many survivors struggle with complex feelings about the narcissistic person, including continued love, concern, or sense of responsibility, despite understanding the harmful nature of the relationship. These feelings are normal and do not indicate weakness or failure in the recovery process. It is possible to simultaneously love someone and recognize that they are dangerous to your well-being, to feel compassion for their suffering while maintaining firm boundaries about acceptable behavior. Recovery does not require hating the narcissistic person or feeling nothing for them, but it does require prioritizing your own safety and well-being over their needs or feelings. The fear of becoming narcissistic oneself often haunts survivors who are working to develop healthier self-esteem and assertion skills. Learning to advocate for your needs, set boundaries, and prioritize your well-being can feel selfish to those who were trained to be selfless. However, healthy self-care and appropriate self-advocacy are fundamentally different from narcissistic behavior because they include consideration for others' rights and well-being rather than trampling on them. True recovery involves developing balanced relationships where both people's needs matter, rather than swinging from complete self-sacrifice to complete self-absorption. Professional therapy, particularly with clinicians trained in narcissistic abuse recovery, can provide invaluable support during the healing process. Trauma-informed approaches, cognitive behavioral therapy, and specialized treatments for complex trauma can address the multiple layers of damage caused by narcissistic relationships. Support groups with other survivors can provide validation and practical strategies that are difficult to find elsewhere. Recovery is possible, but it typically requires professional support, patience with the process, and commitment to rebuilding life on a foundation of authentic self-worth rather than external validation. The goal is not to return to who you were before the narcissistic relationship, but to become a stronger, wiser version of yourself who is equipped to recognize and avoid similar dynamics in the future. Part 14. Protecting your inner circle. Once you understand narcissistic patterns and have experienced their destructive impact, protecting yourself and your loved ones from future narcissistic relationships becomes a crucial life skill. This protection requires developing both internal awareness and external strategies that help you recognize potential threats before becoming emotionally invested in relationships that could cause harm. Prevention is far easier than recovery, making it essential to understand the early warning signs and red flags that indicate someone may have narcissistic traits that could become problematic over time. The early stages of relationships with narcissistic individuals often feel magical and intense in ways that can override logical caution. Love bombing creates powerful emotional experiences that make it difficult to maintain objective assessment of the person's character and compatibility. To protect yourself, pay attention to relationships that feel too good to be true, that progress unusually quickly, or that involve someone who seems determined to sweep you off your feet before you have time to think clearly. Healthy relationships develop gradually, with mutual discovery and respect for appropriate pacing, while narcissistic relationships often involve pressure to commit quickly and deeply before you have sufficient information about the person's true character. Trust your instincts about people even when you cannot articulate specific concerns. Your subconscious mind often picks up on subtle cues that indicate someone is not what they appear to be, even when your conscious mind wants to believe their presentation. Pay attention to feelings of unease, confusion, or exhaustion after spending time with certain people, even if the interaction seemed positive on the surface. Notice if you find yourself making excuses for someone's behavior, minimizing concerning incidents, or feeling like you need to defend them to others who express concerns. These internal warning signals often appear before obvious red flags become apparent, providing early opportunities to protect yourself from deeper involvement. Observe how potential partners, friends or colleagues treat service workers, subordinates, and people who cannot provide them with obvious benefits. Narcissistic individuals often show their true character in these interactions, displaying contempt, impatience or cruelty toward those they perceive as beneath them. Watch how they speak about former relationships, whether they take responsibility for their role in past conflicts, and whether they show genuine empathy for others' experiences. Be wary of people who seem to have a string of enemies or former friends who they describe as crazy, jealous, or inferior, as this pattern often indicates someone who cannot maintain healthy relationships over time. Pay attention to how people respond to boundaries, criticism, or situations where they do not get their way. Healthy individuals may feel disappointed when facing limits or feedback, but they generally accept these experiences as normal parts of life and relationships. Narcissistic individuals often respond to boundaries with anger, manipulation, or attempts to punish those who set limits with them. They may become sulky, withdrawn, or vindictive when they do not receive the treatment they believe they deserve. Test boundaries early in relationships with small limits or disagreements to see how the person responds when they cannot have everything their way. Be cautious of people who seem too interested in your personal information too quickly, or who share intimate details about their own lives before appropriate trust has been established. Narcissistic individuals often create false intimacy through rapid personal disclosure designed to make you feel special and chosen. They may ask probing questions about your past relationships, your finances, your family dynamics, or your vulnerabilities under the guise of wanting to know you better. This information is often collected for future manipulation rather than genuine connection, so maintain appropriate privacy boundaries until trust has been earned over time through consistent, respectful behavior. Notice patterns in how people present themselves across different contexts and relationships. Many narcissistic individuals present dramatically different personas depending on their audience and their goals in each relationship. Pay attention to inconsistencies in their stories, values or behavior that suggest they are performing roles rather than being authentic. Be wary of people who seem to mirror your interests and opinions too perfectly, as this may indicate calculated manipulation rather than genuine compatibility. Healthy people have consistent core values and personality traits that remain relatively stable across different relationships and situations. Protect your children by teaching them about healthy relationship dynamics and helping them develop strong self-esteem that is not dependent on others' approval. Children who understand their own worth and have been taught to trust their instincts are less likely to become targets for narcissistic manipulation. Model healthy boundaries in your own relationships so children learn what mutual respect looks like in practice. Teach them that healthy relationships involve compromise and consideration from both people, not one person constantly adapting to please the other. Help them understand that people who truly care about them will respect their boundaries and feelings rather than trying to manipulate or control them. In professional settings, protect yourself by documenting important communications and decisions to prevent gaslighting or credit stealing. Build relationships with multiple colleagues and supervisors so you are not dependent on any single person for professional advancement or protection. Be cautious about sharing personal information with co-workers who might use it against you later, and maintain professional boundaries even in friendly workplace relationships. Trust your instincts about office politics and avoid getting drawn into triangulation or gossip that could be used to manipulate you or damage your reputation. Remember that protecting yourself from narcissistic individuals does not require being paranoid or suspicious of everyone you meet. The vast majority of people are capable of healthy, mutually beneficial relationships, even if they have some flaws or limitations. The goal is to develop discernment that helps you identify and avoid the small percentage of people whose psychological patterns make them dangerous to your emotional well-being. By understanding narcissistic behavior patterns and trusting your instincts about people who make you feel uncomfortable, you can maintain openness to healthy relationships while protecting yourself from those who would exploit your trust and kindness. Prevention requires vigilance but not cynicism, awareness but not paranoia, and wisdom gained through experience but not bitterness that closes you off from genuine connection with healthy people. Part 15. The Grey Rock Method. When complete avoidance of a narcissistic individual is not possible due to shared children, family relationships, or professional obligations, the Grey Rock Method provides a strategy for minimizing conflict and reducing the narcissistic person's interest in targeting you for manipulation or abuse. This technique involves making yourself as uninteresting and unreactive as possible, like a grey rock that offers nothing stimulating or engaging for the narcissistic individual to feed upon. Understanding how to implement this method effectively can provide crucial protection for those who must maintain contact with narcissistic individuals while minimizing the psychological damage these interactions typically cause. The fundamental principle behind the Grey Rock Method is based on understanding what narcissistic individuals seek from their interactions with others. They crave attention, emotional reactions, drama, and opportunities to feel superior or in control of others' emotional states. When you provide these responses, you reinforce their behavior and encourage them to continue targeting you for future manipulation attempts. By becoming boring, unresponsive, and emotionally flat during interactions, you remove the psychological rewards they seek and eventually train them to look elsewhere for their narcissistic supply. Implementing the Grey Rock method requires significant emotional self-control and strategic thinking about every interaction. When speaking with the narcissistic person, keep your responses brief, factual, and emotionally neutral, avoiding any language that could be interpreted as challenging, dramatic, or particularly interesting. Instead of engaging in arguments or defending yourself against their accusations, respond with phrases like, "Okay, I understand," or "That's interesting," without providing the emotional reaction they are seeking. Share minimal personal information about your life, feelings, or plans, as any details you provide can be used against you later or turned into opportunities for manipulation. Your body language and tone of voice are crucial components of the Grey Rock method. Maintain neutral facial expressions, avoid intense eye contact, and keep your posture relaxed but not particularly engaged. Speak in a monotone voice without the emotional inflections that typically accompany animated conversation. Do not smile excessively or show obvious pleasure, as positive emotions can be interpreted as invitations for further interaction. Similarly, avoid showing obvious distress, anger, or fear, as these negative emotions provide the drama and control that narcissistic individuals often seek. The goal is to present yourself as neither rewarding nor challenging, simply present but uninteresting. When narcissistic individuals realize you are not providing your usual emotional responses, they often escalate their behavior in an attempt to provoke the reactions they crave. This extinction burst can involve increased criticism, more dramatic accusations, or attempts to create crisis situations that force you to engage more actively. During these escalation periods, it becomes even more important to maintain your Grey Rock persona, as giving in to their provocations will teach them that they simply need to try harder to get the responses they want. Remember that their increased aggression is actually a sign that the method is working, not an indication that you should abandon the strategy. The Grey Rock method can be particularly effective in co-parenting situations where you must communicate about children but want to minimize opportunities for manipulation or conflict. Keep all communications focused strictly on the children's needs, schedules, and logistics, refusing to engage in discussions about your personal life, the past relationship, or the narcissistic person's opinions about your choices. Use written communication whenever possible to create a record of interactions and to give yourself time to craft neutral responses rather than reacting emotionally in the moment. When verbal communication is necessary, stick to predetermined topics and end conversations politely but firmly when the narcissistic person attempts to steer the discussion toward inappropriate subjects. In family situations, the Grey Rock method can help reduce drama during gatherings or ongoing relationships with narcissistic relatives. Avoid sharing exciting news, personal struggles, or strong opinions that could provide ammunition for future attacks or manipulation attempts. When the narcissistic family member attempts to provoke conflict or draw you into their drama, respond with polite but disinterested acknowledgement rather than engaging with the substance of their complaints or accusations. Limit the time you spend in their presence when possible, and have exit strategies prepared for situations that become too uncomfortable or stressful to tolerate. The emotional cost of maintaining the Grey Rock method should not be underestimated, as it requires suppressing natural responses and maintaining artificial emotional distance that can feel exhausting and inauthentic. Many people find that they need to decompress after interactions where they have used this method, allowing themselves to process their genuine emotions privately rather than during the actual encounter. It is important to have supportive relationships where you can be authentic and emotionally expressive to balance the emotional suppression required during grey rock interactions. Consider the method a temporary protective strategy rather than a permanent way of being, using it only when necessary to manage unavoidable contact with narcissistic individuals. Some situations may require modifications to the traditional grey rock approach. In professional settings, you may need to maintain basic courtesy and collaboration while still avoiding unnecessary personal engagement or emotional reactions. When children are present, you may need to model appropriate but minimal responses, rather than complete emotional withdrawal that could confuse or frighten young observers. The key is adapting the core principle of providing minimal narcissistic supply while still meeting your obligations and maintaining your integrity in the specific context. It is important to recognize that the grey rock method is not appropriate or safe in all situations involving narcissistic individuals. If the person has a history of violence, or if your lack of engagement seems to escalate them toward dangerous behavior, prioritize your physical safety over implementing this strategy. Some narcissistic individuals may interpret grey rock behavior as a challenge or insult that requires punishment, making the technique counterproductive in certain relationships. Always trust your instincts about safety and consider seeking professional advice about the best approach for your specific situation. The grey rock method is a tool for managing ongoing contact with narcissistic individuals, not a solution for genuinely dangerous or abusive situations that may require more drastic protective measures. Part 16. Breaking the generational cycle. One of the most important aspects of understanding narcissism involves recognizing how these patterns can be transmitted across generations and taking conscious action to ensure that the cycle of dysfunction does not continue into the next generation. Many people who survived narcissistic parenting live in fear that they will repeat the same damaging patterns with their own children, while others may not realize they are unconsciously perpetuating dysfunctional dynamics they learned in their family of origin. Breaking generational cycles requires conscious effort, self-awareness, and often professional support to develop healthier parenting approaches that foster genuine self-esteem and emotional intelligence in children. The first step in breaking generational cycles involves honest self-assessment about which patterns from your family of origin may have become automatic responses in your own parenting. Children who grew up with narcissistic parents may have learned to use guilt, manipulation, or emotional withdrawal as parenting tools without realizing these approaches are harmful. They may struggle with setting appropriate boundaries with their children, either becoming overly permissive to avoid repeating their parents' harsh criticism, or becoming overly controlling in an attempt to prevent their children from making mistakes. Some may find themselves competing with their children, feeling threatened by their achievements, or needing to be the center of attention even during their child's special moments. Healthy parenting requires developing the ability to see your children as separate individuals with their own needs, feelings, and developmental trajectories, rather than extensions of yourself or reflections of your parenting success. This means celebrating their achievements without making the accomplishments about you, supporting them through failures without feeling personally embarrassed, and allowing them to develop their own interests and friendships even when these differ from your preferences. Children need parents who can take genuine pleasure in their growth and independence rather than parents who feel threatened by their developing autonomy or who need their children to remain dependent to feel valuable. This requires parents to develop their own sources of self-worth and emotional fulfillment, rather than relying on their children to meet their psychological needs. Teaching emotional intelligence and empathy requires modeling these skills consistently in your own behavior and relationships. Children learn more from observing how their parents handle emotions than from lectures about appropriate behavior. This means acknowledging your own mistakes and showing genuine remorse when you hurt others, demonstrating how to take responsibility without making excuses or blaming external factors. It involves showing empathy for others' experiences, including your children's feelings, even when their emotions seem inconvenient or unreasonable to you. Children who see their parents struggle with difficult emotions and work to handle them appropriately learn that emotional challenges are normal parts of life rather than signs of weakness or failure. Building genuine self-esteem in children requires focusing on character development, effort and internal qualities, rather than just achievements, appearance or external validation. Praise children for showing kindness, persistence, creativity and integrity, rather than only for winning competitions or earning high grades. Help them develop internal standards for success and satisfaction, rather than teaching them to depend on others' approval for their sense of worth. This means allowing them to experience appropriate consequences for their choices while providing emotional support and guidance for learning from mistakes. Children need to learn that they are valuable as human beings, regardless of their performance, while also understanding that their choices and behavior have real effects on themselves and others. Healthy boundary setting involves maintaining consistent expectations while respecting your children's developing autonomy and individual personalities. Children need structure and limits to feel safe and learn self-control, but these boundaries should be age-appropriate and focused on teaching life skills rather than maintaining parental control. Explain the reasons behind rules and expectations so children understand the logic, rather than simply demanding compliance because of your authority. Be willing to negotiate and adjust rules as children grow and demonstrate increased responsibility, showing them that earning freedom and independence is possible through mature behavior. Avoid using boundaries as punishment for disappointing you or as ways to maintain power over children who are naturally growing toward independence. Breaking generational cycles often requires healing your own childhood wounds rather than expecting parenthood itself to resolve past trauma. Unhealed pain from your own upbringing can create unconscious reactions that interfere with your ability to parent effectively and compassionately. This might involve therapy to process past experiences, developing supportive relationships with other adults to meet your emotional needs, and learning stress management techniques that prevent you from taking your frustrations out on your children. Children should not be responsible for managing their parents' emotions or serving as confidants for adult problems and relationships. They need parents who are emotionally stable enough to provide consistent support and guidance, rather than requiring their children to take care of them. Pay particular attention to how you handle your children's achievements and failures, as these moments often reveal unconscious narcissistic patterns that may have been passed down through generations. Avoid living vicariously through your children's successes or feeling personally diminished by their struggles and setbacks. Resist the urge to take credit for their accomplishments, or to blame them for reflecting poorly on your parenting when they make mistakes. Support their individual interests and goals, even when these differ from your own dreams and expectations for them. Remember that their childhood should be about their development and happiness, not about providing you with pride, status, or emotional fulfillment. Teaching healthy relationship skills requires demonstrating mutual respect, appropriate conflict resolution, and emotional regulation in your own relationships. Children learn about love and partnership by observing how their parents treat each other and how conflicts are handled in the home. Model the behavior you want them to expect from future partners, while also showing them how to communicate their own needs and boundaries respectfully. Avoid involving children in adult conflicts or using them as allies against their other parent, as this teaches manipulation and emotional boundary violations that can affect their future relationships. If you recognize narcissistic patterns in your own parenting, remember that awareness is the first step toward change and that seeking help shows strength rather than failure. Parenting classes, therapy and support groups can provide tools and strategies for developing healthier approaches to raising children. Many parents who grew up in dysfunctional families successfully break generational cycles by committing to conscious, intentional parenting rather than simply repeating what they experienced. The goal is not to become a perfect parent, but to provide your children with the emotional safety, genuine love, and healthy boundaries that foster their development into emotionally intelligent, empathetic adults who can form healthy relationships throughout their lives. Breaking the cycle is one of the most meaningful gifts you can give to future generations, creating a legacy of health rather than dysfunction for families yet to come. Part 17. The Legal System and Narcissistic Manipulation. When narcissistic individuals become involved in legal proceedings, whether through divorce, custody battles, criminal charges, or civil litigation, their psychological patterns often intensify and become weaponized in ways that can prolong conflicts and cause additional trauma to all parties involved. Understanding how narcissism manifests in legal contexts is crucial for anyone who may need to navigate the courts with a narcissistic individual, as traditional legal approaches may be insufficient to address the unique challenges these personalities present. The legal system, designed for rational actors operating in good faith, can become a playground for manipulation when one party is primarily motivated by the need to win and control rather than by genuine pursuit of justice or fair resolution. Narcissistic individuals often view legal proceedings as opportunities to continue their patterns of manipulation and control through official channels. They may file frivolous lawsuits, make false accusations, or use court orders as weapons to harass and intimidate their targets. The formal structure of the legal system can provide a veneer of legitimacy to their actions while allowing them to force their victims to engage with them through court proceedings, even when the victim wants no contact. They often represent themselves or frequently change attorneys when legal professionals refuse to pursue unrealistic or unethical strategies that serve the narcissistic individual's emotional needs rather than legitimate legal objectives. In family court proceedings, narcissistic individuals often use children as pawns in their battle to maintain control over their former partners. They may seek custody, not out of genuine concern for the children's well-being, but to punish their ex-partner or to maintain a connection that allows continued manipulation and control. They often make allegations of abuse, neglect, or parental unfitness that are designed to damage their ex-partner's reputation and legal standing rather than protect the children. They may coach children to make statements against the other parent or create situations designed to make the other parent appear unstable or unreasonable to court officials. The lengthy, expensive nature of custody litigation serves their purposes by draining their targets' financial and emotional resources while providing ongoing opportunities for harassment and manipulation. The documentation and evidence requirements of legal proceedings often work against victims of narcissistic abuse because much of the damage caused by these individuals is psychological and difficult to prove in court. Gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and psychological control leave no physical evidence and may not be understood by legal professionals who lack training in recognizing these subtle forms of abuse. Narcissistic individuals are often skilled at presenting themselves as reasonable and victimized while portraying their targets as unstable or vindictive. They may use their victims' emotional responses to their abuse as evidence that the victim is the actual problem, claiming that tears, anger, or fear are signs of mental instability rather than natural reactions to prolonged manipulation and control. Preparing for legal proceedings with a narcissistic individual requires extensive documentation and strategic planning that differs from typical legal preparation. Keep detailed records of all interactions, communications, and incidents, including dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes when possible. Save all text messages, emails, and voicemails that demonstrate the narcissistic individual's behavior patterns, threats, or admissions of wrongdoing. Document any violations of court orders or agreements immediately and report them to appropriate authorities rather than trying to handle violations informally. Gather evidence of their behavior patterns from multiple sources and time periods to establish clear documentation of their character and typical responses to conflict or challenge. Working with legal professionals who understand narcissistic personality patterns can make a crucial difference in the outcome of legal proceedings. Seek attorneys who have specific experience with high-conflict personalities and who understand the unique challenges these cases present. Educate your legal team about narcissistic behavior patterns so they can anticipate likely tactics and prepare appropriate responses. Be prepared for the possibility that proceedings will take longer and cost more than typical cases because narcissistic individuals often use the legal system to continue their harassment rather than seeking genuine resolution. Discuss strategies for protecting yourself and your children from ongoing manipulation attempts that may occur throughout the legal process. Guardian ad litem appointments and custody evaluations can be double-edged swords in cases involving narcissistic individuals. These professionals are supposed to focus on the children's best interests, but narcissistic individuals are often skilled at charming new people and presenting themselves favorably during initial meetings. They may spend considerable effort and resources presenting an idealized image to evaluators while simultaneously working to undermine their ex-partner's credibility. It is crucial to provide evaluators with comprehensive documentation of behavior patterns over time, rather than relying on their ability to see through the narcissistic individual's presentation during brief encounters. Request that evaluators receive specific training about narcissistic abuse and high-conflict personalities before making recommendations that will affect your family's future. The emotional toll of legal proceedings with narcissistic individuals extends far beyond typical litigation stress. These cases often trigger renewed trauma for abuse survivors while providing new opportunities for the narcissistic individual to inflict psychological damage through official channels. Victims may find themselves questioning their own perceptions again, as the narcissistic individual presents alternative versions of events to court officials with apparent sincerity and conviction. The financial drain of prolonged litigation can create additional stress and limit options for safety and independence. Professional counseling and support groups for those dealing with narcissistic abuse can provide crucial emotional support during these challenging proceedings. Some narcissistic individuals use the threat of legal action as a form of ongoing intimidation, even when they have no legitimate grounds for litigation. They may threaten to sue for defamation when their victims speak truthfully about their experiences, to seek custody modifications when children begin showing preferences for the healthier parent, or to pursue criminal charges when their victims set boundaries that interfere with their control. Understanding your legal rights and consulting with attorneys about the legitimacy of these threats can help you avoid being manipulated through fear of legal consequences that may not be realistic. Document these threats as evidence of ongoing harassment and intimidation tactics that may be relevant in future proceedings. Ultimately, the goal in legal proceedings with narcissistic individuals should be achieving the best possible outcome for yourself and your children while minimizing opportunities for ongoing manipulation and control. This may require accepting imperfect resolutions that provide clear boundaries and limited contact, rather than pursuing ideal outcomes that require continued engagement with someone who will use any opportunity to cause additional harm. Focus on creating legal agreements that are specific, enforceable, and difficult to misinterpret, rather than relying on good faith cooperation that is unlikely to occur. Remember that winning in court against a narcissistic individual often means simply surviving the process with your sanity and resources intact, rather than achieving perfect justice or acknowledgement of the harm you have suffered. Part 18. The Workplace Invasion. When narcissistic individuals infiltrate professional environments, they can systematically destroy team cohesion, sabotage productivity, and create toxic cultures that drive away talented employees while rewarding manipulation and self-promotion over genuine competence and collaboration. Understanding how to recognize and respond to workplace narcissism is essential for protecting your career, maintaining your professional integrity, and contributing to healthier organizational cultures. These individuals often rise to positions of influence because their confidence and self-promotion can be mistaken for leadership qualities, while their willingness to take credit and shift blame helps them navigate corporate politics effectively at the expense of their colleagues and subordinates. The narcissistic boss represents one of the most challenging workplace dynamics because of the inherent power imbalance that prevents direct confrontation while making escape difficult without significant career disruption. These supervisors often create environments of fear and uncertainty where employees compete for approval while walking on eggshells to avoid triggering unpredictable reactions. They typically show extreme favoritism toward employees who provide sufficient admiration and submission, while targeting those who demonstrate independent thinking, question their decisions, or fail to acknowledge their supposed superiority. Their decision-making is often based more on personal ego needs than business logic, leading to poor strategic choices that they blame on subordinates or external factors when results prove disappointing. Recognition stealing becomes an art form for workplace narcissists who systematically position themselves to take credit for others' innovations, hard work, and problem-solving while ensuring that failures and setbacks are attributed to team members. They volunteer to present successful projects to upper management while sending subordinates to explain disappointing results. During brainstorming sessions, they build on others' ideas and later reference these concepts as their own original thinking. They often become the primary point of contact for important stakeholder communications, allowing them to control information flow and ensure their visibility in key relationships. When confronted about these behaviors, they express surprise and claim they were simply taking initiative that others failed to show, making it difficult to address the problem without appearing petty or paranoid. The triangulation tactics that narcissistic individuals use in personal relationships become even more destructive in professional settings where they can damage careers and reputations through strategic information sharing and alliance building. They create competing factions within teams, share confidential information selectively to create mistrust and insecurity, and position themselves as the central figure that everyone must please to succeed. They may tell different team members contradictory information about projects or expectations, then act surprised when confusion and conflict result. They often develop special relationships with high-performing employees while publicly criticizing or excluding others, creating environments where colleagues compete for favor rather than collaborating effectively. Customer and client relationships suffer when narcissistic employees prioritize their own image and ego needs over genuine service and business success. Narcissistic salespeople may overpromise to close deals without considering whether their company can deliver, leaving others to manage disappointed customers and damaged reputations. In customer service roles, they may escalate conflicts unnecessarily rather than admit mistakes or seek help when needed, protecting their image as the expert at the expense of customer satisfaction. They often take personal credit for successful client relationships while blaming account losses on factors beyond their control, making it difficult for organizations to learn from failures and improve their services. The financial cost of workplace narcissism extends beyond obvious metrics like turnover and recruitment expenses to include reduced innovation, decreased employee engagement, and lost business opportunities that result from toxic leadership and damaged team dynamics. Creative employees may stop contributing ideas when they know credit will be stolen, while productive workers may reduce their effort when they see that political maneuvering is rewarded more than actual performance. The stress of working in narcissistic environments leads to increased sick leave, reduced productivity, and higher healthcare costs, as employees struggle with anxiety, depression, and stress-related physical symptoms. Organizations may lose valuable clients and business partnerships when narcissistic employees damage relationships through their self-serving behavior and inability to prioritize long-term success over short-term ego gratification. Protecting yourself in workplace environments with narcissistic individuals requires sophisticated documentation strategies and relationship management that goes beyond typical professional networking. Keep detailed records of your contributions to projects, including emails, drafts, meeting notes, and any other evidence that establishes timelines and authorship of ideas. Copy key stakeholders on important communications so that narcissistic colleagues cannot later distort your messages or claim credit for your work. Build relationships with colleagues and supervisors outside your immediate team so you have allies who can verify your contributions and support your professional development when advancement opportunities arise. When possible, request written confirmation of assignments, expectations, and deadlines to protect yourself from gaslighting attempts and changing goalposts that are designed to set you up for failure. Strategic relationship management with narcissistic colleagues involves providing just enough recognition and acknowledgement to avoid becoming a target while refusing to enable their most destructive behaviors. Frame your ideas and suggestions in ways that allow them to feel ownership or credit when this serves important business objectives without compromising your integrity or career advancement. Avoid direct confrontation about their problematic behaviors, unless absolutely necessary for business operations, as this typically results in retaliation rather than positive change. Instead, focus on documenting patterns of behavior and their business impact, presenting concerns to higher management in terms of operational problems rather than personality conflicts. When narcissistic behavior becomes truly destructive to business operations, building a case for intervention requires careful documentation of specific incidents and their measurable impact on productivity, customer satisfaction, employee retention, or other business metrics. Work with HR professionals who understand workplace psychology and can recognize the difference between normal personality conflicts and genuinely toxic behavior patterns that require intervention. Be prepared for the possibility that organizations may tolerate narcissistic behavior from high-performing individuals or those with powerful connections, requiring you to develop exit strategies if the environment becomes unbearable. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to seek opportunities in organizations with stronger accountability measures, better leadership development programs, and cultures that genuinely reward collaboration and ethical behavior over political manipulation and self-promotion. Your career and mental health are too valuable to sacrifice to environments that enable and reward narcissistic dysfunction at the expense of employee well-being and genuine business success. Part 19. When love becomes addiction. The trauma bond that develops in relationships with narcissistic individuals creates a form of psychological addiction that can be as powerful and difficult to break as dependencies on substances or behaviors. This bond forms through the intermittent reinforcement schedule of love bombing followed by devaluation, creating neurochemical highs and lows that literally rewire the brain's reward systems. Understanding the addictive nature of these relationships is crucial for both those trying to escape them and those who wonder why intelligent, capable people seem unable to leave obviously harmful situations. The neurobiological basis of trauma bonding involves the same brain chemicals and reward pathways that drive other forms of addiction. During love bombing phases, the brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, and other feel-good chemicals that create intense pleasure and attachment. When the narcissistic person withdraws this attention during devaluation phases, the brain experiences withdrawal symptoms similar to those seen in substance addiction, including anxiety, depression, obsessive thinking, and desperate craving for the return of positive feelings. The unpredictable nature of when positive attention might return creates an intermittent reinforcement schedule that is the most addictive pattern known to behavioral psychology. Slot machines use this same principle to keep gamblers pulling the lever despite consistent losses, hoping for the next big win that might restore their euphoric high. The cognitive dissonance created by loving someone who hurts you forces the mind to find ways to reconcile contradictory experiences and emotions. Victims often develop elaborate explanations for their partner's behavior, focusing on rare moments of kindness while minimizing or forgetting incidents of abuse and manipulation. They may blame themselves for triggering negative reactions, believing that if they could just be better partners, the loving person from the early relationship would return permanently. This self-blame serves multiple psychological functions. It provides hope that the situation can improve, it allows the victim to maintain some sense of control, and it protects against the terrifying reality that they are in love with someone who may never be capable of healthy, reciprocal love. The isolation that typically occurs in narcissistic relationships intensifies the trauma bond by making the narcissistic person the victim's primary source of social connection and emotional support. When friends and family members are gradually pushed away through manipulation and conflict, the victim becomes increasingly dependent on the narcissistic person for all their social and emotional needs. This dependency makes leaving feel impossible because it would mean facing complete isolation rather than just ending a romantic relationship. The narcissistic person becomes like a drug that provides both the poison and the antidote, creating problems while simultaneously offering the only apparent relief from the pain they have caused. The trauma bond often intensifies rather than weakens over time as the victim's self-esteem erodes and their sense of reality becomes increasingly distorted. Gaslighting and manipulation make it difficult to trust their own perceptions, leaving them dependent on the narcissistic person's version of events to understand what is happening in their own life. The intermittent moments of kindness become more precious because they are so rare, like water in a desert that becomes infinitely valuable precisely because of its scarcity. The victim may find themselves feeling grateful for basic human decency from their partner, celebrating moments when they are treated with minimal respect as though these represent great progress in the relationship. Financial dependency often reinforces the trauma bond by making escape seem practically impossible, even when the victim recognizes the relationship's toxicity. Narcissistic partners frequently control financial resources, sabotage their partner's career development, or create debt and financial instability that makes independence feel unrealistic. The victim may stay, not because they want to, but because they cannot see how they would survive financially without their partner's support. This practical dependency combines with emotional addiction to create what feels like an inescapable trap, where leaving would mean losing not just the relationship but also housing, financial security and social connections all at once. Children in the relationship create additional complications that narcissistic individuals often exploit to maintain the trauma bond even when their partner recognizes the need to leave. The narcissistic person may threaten to seek custody, move away with the children, or turn the children against their other parent if separation occurs. They may use the children's needs and stability as reasons why the relationship must continue, claiming that leaving would damage the children more than staying in a dysfunctional situation. Parents struggling with trauma bonds often feel torn between protecting themselves and protecting their children, unsure whether leaving or staying poses greater risks to their family's well-being. Breaking trauma bonds requires understanding that the longing for the narcissistic person is not evidence of true love, but rather a predictable psychological response to intermittent reinforcement and emotional manipulation. The withdrawal symptoms that occur when contact is reduced are temporary biological responses that will diminish over time with consistent no-contact or limited contact approaches. Professional therapy, particularly trauma-informed approaches that address both the psychological and neurobiological aspects of these bonds, can provide crucial support during the detoxification process. Support groups with others who have experienced similar relationships can offer validation and practical strategies that are difficult to find elsewhere. The recovery process often involves grieving not just the end of the relationship, but also the loss of the person you believed your partner could become based on their early presentation. Many trauma-bonded individuals feel like they are abandoning someone they love, not recognizing that the person they love may have been largely an illusion created through manipulation and false presentation. Healing requires accepting that hoping for change or believing in someone's potential cannot substitute for dealing with their actual behavior and its impact on your well-being. The goal is not to stop caring about the narcissistic person, but to care more about yourself and your own right to be treated with respect and kindness. Breaking trauma bonds is one of the most difficult psychological challenges anyone can face. But it is possible with proper support, understanding, and commitment to prioritizing your own mental health and safety over maintaining a connection that causes more harm than joy. Part 20. The Path to Authentic Living. As we reach the end of our exploration into the psychology of narcissism, we arrive at perhaps the most important question of all. How do we move forward from this knowledge to create lives of genuine meaning, authentic connection, and psychological freedom? Understanding narcissism is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a doorway to recognizing the difference between healthy self-regard and pathological self-obsession, between genuine confidence and defensive grandiosity, between real love and manipulative control. The ultimate purpose of this understanding is not to become cynical about human nature, but to develop the wisdom necessary to choose health over dysfunction, authenticity over performance, and genuine connection over exploitative relationships. The journey toward authentic living begins with developing what psychologists call differentiated relationships, where you can maintain your own identity, values, and emotional center while remaining genuinely connected to others. This means learning to love people without losing yourself, to support others without enabling their dysfunction, and to maintain compassion without sacrificing your own well-being on the altar of someone else's needs. Authentic relationships involve mutual respect, reciprocal consideration, and the freedom to grow and change without fear of abandonment or punishment. They require the courage to show your real self, including your flaws and vulnerabilities, while also expecting others to bring their authentic selves to the relationship rather than performing roles designed to manipulate or control. Developing genuine self-esteem involves learning to value yourself based on your inherent worth as a human being rather than on your achievements, appearance, or ability to please others. This internal sense of worth provides stability that cannot be shaken by external criticism or praise, because it does not depend on others' opinions for validation. Healthy self-esteem includes realistic assessment of both your strengths and limitations, acceptance of your humanity without requiring perfection, and the ability to learn from mistakes without being devastated by them. It involves taking responsibility for your choices and their consequences, while also recognizing that you deserve care, respect, and kindness from others regardless of your imperfections. The practice of authentic living requires developing emotional intelligence that allows you to recognize, understand, and appropriately express your feelings, while also responding empathetically to others' emotional experiences. This means learning to sit with difficult emotions without immediately trying to escape them or project them onto others. It involves developing the capacity for genuine empathy that considers others' well-being alongside your own, rather than using emotional awareness as a tool for manipulation or control. Emotional intelligence includes the ability to regulate your own emotions appropriately, while also setting boundaries that protect you from others' emotional dysfunction or manipulation attempts. Creating a life based on authentic values rather than external expectations requires the courage to disappoint people whose approval comes at too high a cost to your integrity or well-being. This means making decisions based on what aligns with your genuine beliefs and long-term goals, rather than what will earn the most praise or avoid the most criticism in the moment. Authentic living involves accepting that you cannot control others' reactions to your choices, while taking full responsibility for ensuring that your choices reflect your actual values rather than your fears or desires for approval. It requires developing the internal strength to withstand social pressure, family expectations, or professional demands that ask you to compromise your core principles or authentic self-expression. The healing journey from narcissistic abuse or dysfunctional family patterns often involves grieving the loss of illusions about people you loved while simultaneously opening your heart to the possibility of healthier relationships in the future. This process requires letting go of the fantasy that you can fix, change, or love someone into becoming the person you need them to be. It involves accepting that some people may never be capable of the kind of relationship you desire, while maintaining hope that others exist who can meet you with equal commitment to growth, honesty, and mutual respect. Healing means learning to distinguish between your responsibility to treat others with kindness and the impossible burden of being responsible for their emotional state, choices, or happiness. Building resilience against future manipulation requires developing what therapists call a strong internal locus of control, where your sense of reality and self-worth comes primarily from your own experience and judgment rather than from others' opinions or reactions. This internal strength makes you less susceptible to gaslighting, manipulation, and control attempts because you have learned to trust your own perceptions and feelings. Resilience also involves building a support network of healthy relationships that can provide perspective and encouragement when you encounter difficult people or challenging situations. It includes developing practical skills like boundary setting, conflict resolution, and stress management that help you navigate life's inevitable difficulties without losing your center or compromising your values. The practice of authentic living extends beyond personal relationships to include how you show up in your professional life, your community involvement, and your contribution to the larger world. This means choosing work that aligns with your values when possible, treating colleagues and subordinates with respect, regardless of their ability to benefit you personally, and using your talents and resources in ways that contribute to something larger than your own advancement. Authentic living involves modeling the kind of behavior you want to see in the world rather than simply adapting to dysfunction or competing in systems that reward manipulation and self-promotion over genuine competence and character. It requires the courage to speak up against injustice, support others who are vulnerable, and refuse to participate in systems that dehumanize or exploit people for profit or power. Perhaps most importantly, authentic living involves developing compassion for the wounded parts of yourself and others while maintaining firm boundaries about acceptable behavior. Understanding that narcissistic individuals are often driven by deep pain and early trauma can help you respond with empathy rather than hatred, while still protecting yourself from their harmful behavior. This compassionate understanding does not require you to accept abuse or sacrifice your well-being to help someone else heal, but it can free you from the bitter resentment that poison your own emotional life. True healing involves developing the capacity to wish others well, while choosing to surround yourself with people who can love you in return, rather than just accepting love from you. The ultimate goal of understanding narcissism is not to become an expert at diagnosing personality disorders, but to develop the wisdom necessary to create a life filled with genuine connection, meaningful purpose, and authentic self-expression. This knowledge serves as a compass that can guide you toward relationships and environments that support your growth, while helping you avoid situations that would diminish your spirit or compromise your integrity. The journey toward authentic living is not about becoming perfect or invulnerable, but about becoming real, choosing growth over stagnation, love over fear, and truth over comfortable illusions. In a world that often rewards superficiality and manipulation, choosing authenticity becomes an act of quiet revolution that can inspire others to examine their own choices and relationships. Your commitment to living authentically, treating others with genuine respect, and refusing to enable dysfunction creates ripples that extend far beyond your immediate circle, contributing to a healthier world for future generations. The psychology of narcissism reveals both the depths of human dysfunction and the heights of human potential for healing and growth. By understanding these patterns, we develop the tools necessary to protect ourselves and our loved ones while contributing to a culture that values genuine human connection over exploitation and manipulation. The choice between narcissistic patterns and authentic living is one that each of us faces daily in small moments and major decisions. May your understanding of these dynamics guide you toward relationships that honor your humanity, work that reflects your values, and a life that contributes to healing rather than harm in our interconnected world. The journey toward authentic living is not easy, but it is the only path that leads to genuine peace, lasting happiness, and the kind of love that transforms rather than destroys.